So the Tashbets and brought in the Pitrei Tshuva and the Bir Hetev have shown us the dangers of drinking this water. We maybe don't fully understand that there is a Malach HaMavis or how exactly he uses water. It seems a bit strange to us and maybe non-rational. So let's take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan, who is a Lithuanian rabbi and is, tries to make some rational sense out of this. And let's hear what he does. So we're in Shin Lamed Tet in the Aruch HaShulchan, and I am looking at 9 Tet. And he says like this: Ketav Rabbeinu Beit Yosef, Minhag lishpoch kol hamayim hashuavim shebeshchuna tamet ad kan shana. He says, he quotes the Beit Yosef that we have to pour out all the water in the neighborhood. V'shchuna hu shnei batim levad beit hamet. So the shchuna just means 2 houses in addition to the house of the mate person, the dead person. So that's 3 houses. V'atam katvu akadmonim kedei sheyedu shemet. So the reason we do this is that you should know that somebody died, just like we saw. We don't want to say it with words. Because we have a pasuk in the Torah that says that Miriam died and there was no water. So we see that when Miriam dies, there's no water. We see that death means that we lose water, so we pour out the water. So it's kind of it sort of reminds us of that biblical event by pouring out the water. So that's why we choose this method to notify people. We could, of course, open the door or open the windows to indicate that somebody died. Oh, what about Shabbat and Yom Tov? Why should we not pour out? So we can't notify people, we can't make them suffer on Shabbat. We can't make them sad. V'ken ha-minhag, and that is the minhag ha-pashut, etzleinu. Libli lishpoch mayim b'shabbat v'yom tov. He said, okay, so we don't pour out water on Shabbat and Yom Tov, so we don't want to make people sad. V'gam l'tam zeh ein chiyuv lishpoch kol ha-mayim kimuvan. And obviously we don't have to pour out all the water, because once you pour out 1 or 2 cups, people will notice that you poured out water, they'll see that somebody died. So he's already saying you don't have to pour out all the water. That's already very different, because if there'd be poison in the water, wouldn't you have to pour it all out? So he's going to deal with that. Umekor hadin me'a kolbo. The kolbo is the source of this law. Katav le'ikaratam hazeh v'achar kach katav v'yesh omrim ki atam l'fisha malach hamavet mepil b'mayim tipat sam hamavet. Here he changes the word to sam hamavet. But he says the kolbo brings the first reason of notifying, and then he also mentions that the angel of death might put in the poison of death into the water. And that seems to be, maybe then you would have to pour out even on Shabbat. Vehevi od ma'aseh lezeh, and that's what he brought an event about this. And that's what we saw about the person dying. Ayin sham uvedai tam zeh tafel l'tam harishon. So he says this reason is tafel. It's not the real reason. It's batel. Tafel means like batel. It's no longer as significant. The significant reason is the first one. This other reason is not significant. So the first thing he did was let's think of what the Aruch HaShulchan is doing. First, he said that the reason is just practical to tell people without saying bad news. Secondly, he said that it has a biblical source. So he's connecting it to the Tanakh and not to medieval superstition, perhaps. He says we simply do it because that's what happened with Miriam. It's a biblical, it's a reminder of what happened in the Bible. And then when he actually deals with this question about the Malach HaMavis, he says that reason is tafel, is not significant. So he's going very far away from it. He not only is going far away from it, he provided his own reason of Miriam. Although he quoted it in the name of the Rishonim. So, in the name of the... Rishonim. Okay. He says, V'timhani. So he says the Tam Rishon is the main reason. And then he says, V'timhani al-kama shemachmirim bezeh harbe. Ki'ilu hi gemara mefareshet. He said, I'm so shocked at people who are machmir on this halacha of pouring out this water as though it's some kind of gemara mefareshet. In other words, he's a Lithuanian rabbi. He respects the Gemara. If it would be a Rishalmi or a Bavli, if it would be from the Gemara, then fine. But this is just, the Kolbos said it, without any source. He says, why are people so machmir? Of course, we saw all the chumras. We saw in the Pitrei Tshuva about not being batel and about, pouring out all the water maybe. V'yesh shirotzim esor tavshil, and we saw that there's some that even want to forbid food. Im bishlu b'hamayim, if you cooked with this water. Ve'ein zeh ela divrei tema. This is just unexplainable opinions. How could we ever say that the food would be forbidden? Why? V'harei afilu b'sakanot ha'mevorot b'gemara amru chazal gam kein v'ha'idna didashu bo rabim shomer p'teim Hashem. So he brings a couple of cases from Shabbos and from Yevamos that when there's sakanot that people ignore, people dashu, they just ignore them, they just tread over them, then you don't have to keep them either. You don't have to worry about these dangers, and Hashem will protect you. Now Hashem will remove these dangers because you're just behaving like everybody. If you're following in the normal behavior, then Hashem won't punish you. So we don't have to worry about these ignored or inexplicable or maybe superstitious dangers. So he says he doesn't see why the food would be usher. Why should we be so machmir? For kol v'chein b'milta kihai, and certainly in such a case, umaya aseh ha'arim ha'gdolim shebegimel ha'irot yimseu me'ot balabatim. What would you do in a big city where you have big tall buildings and in 3 houses around the death, you may have hundreds of families living in those buildings. All of them are going to have to pour out all their water. Umaya suha ani. What about an ani? What about a poor person? Bechoref shebekvedut lahasig mayim. It's hard for him in the winter to get water. He's got to break the ice and bring blocks of ice and melt it, and then you can tell him to throw it all away. He says it can't be. I therefore think, in my humble opinion, to be very mekel b'davar. V'ken ra'iti migdolei hora'ah b'zman ha'chorev k'sha'mayim mechusim v'ken im yesh torach la'asig mayim v'hema mechusim. If it's hard to get water because it's winter or for whatever reason, and the water is covered, then you don't have to throw it out. Yesh lahakel. Ub'Shabbat v'Yom Tov ein lishpoch klal, and on Shabbat and Yom Tov you certainly don't have to pour out. Remember, we saw that maybe you should. Maybe you should, even if you don't have to notify. Maybe after Shabbat you should pour it out because it's dangerous water. V'kol mayim shehem l'mitzvah shomer mitzvah lo yidadavara, and he quotes the same idea that if it's for a mitzvah, for sure it's not a problem. So you see, we see that the Aruch HaShulchan, first of all, he doesn't even mention this reason of the Malach HaMavis. He gives an alternate reason, which is from the biblical sources. And then, he does mention it, but he says we shouldn't be machmir about it. He says it's not a sakana of the Gemara. If it's a sakana of the Gemara, maybe we should be machmir. But even the sakanas of the Gemara, we don't have to be, because people in general are not careful about them, and therefore Hashem will protect us. So, in general, he's trying to sort of undermine this behavior, perhaps because it's not so rational, and also because it causes hardship to some people. But in the end, he says, really, he's only going to permit the water if it's mechuseh, if it's covered, if it's somehow not, maybe the Malach HaMavis doesn't dip his knife into water that's covered. So we see that the Aruch HaShulchan is accepting a little bit the mystical part, but he's mitigating it, he's downgrading it, he's trying to remove it as much as possible. But we talked about perhaps the symbolism of pouring out the water is sort of poetic, is saying that a death has occurred, you're emptying the life, you are participating, not that you're causing it, but that you are internalizing that there was a death here, and you're emptying out the water, and therefore we can understand it maybe in a in an emotional way. Now, we don't have time to read the Gemara, but there's a Gemara in Ketubot, Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, which talks about the death of Rebbe. That Gemara shows that maybe when Rebbe died, the maid, saw the people praying, and so she prayed that he should live also. But then she saw how much he was suffering going to the bathroom all the time. She prayed that he should die. But he didn't die or live. The Talmidim were praying that he should live, and she was praying that that the Elyonim should take away Rebbe, bring him up to heaven, because she saw how much suffering he was in. But the rabbis, but Rebbe's Talmidim were praying that he should live. So she went up to the roof and threw out an amphor, some kind of clay vessel, made a loud noise, and the people stopped praying, and at that moment Rebbe could die. And Rav Moshe and others use this as a source to teach that if someone is suffering, you can, first of all, two things. You can pray that he should die, that's the first thing. But the second thing is, you can stop those people from praying that he should live. In other words, anything that's artificially keeping him alive, you can remove. She did something external, without touching Rebbe, without taking a tube out of his body, but she did something external to cause the people to stop praying, which would then allow him to die. In other words, he was being kept artificially alive by this prayer of his Talmidim. And by her stopping that, he was able to die. And that's permitted. It is permitted to stop something from going on that is causing him to continue living, as long as it's distant from him, it's not touching him or connected to him. I want to look at the Gilyon. Well, actually, let's look at the Aruch HaShulchan again. Let's look at the Aruch HaShulchan. I didn't do this earlier today, but let's do it now. Back to Shin Lamed Tet, and let's look at 4, Dalet. So he quotes the Ramah as saying that if someone's chopping wood, you can similarly, like the story of Rebbe, you can tell the person to stop chopping wood, and then the noise of the chopping was keeping him alive, but by telling him to stop chopping, the noise will go away, and then the person will be able to quietly fall into death and let his soul out, instead of keeping him alive, even though he's a Goses, he's suffering. Because remember, by definition, Goses is a period of Isurim, because the experience of the neshama leaving the body is itself painful. So a person's in the state of Goses, and by definition he's in Yisurim, he's in suffering, and we can stop things that keep him alive as long as we don't touch his body. Distant things like someone chopping wood, or like people praying with Rebbe. Now let's see how the Aruch HaShulchan understands the Ramah in Dalet. Ubir Devarav, he's explaining now the Ramah. De b'makom de mikodem nitba'er she'ein osin ma'aseh she'al yedei zeh yikravu mitato. First, we explained that you can't do an action that will cause his death to be hastened. Kumo lishmot hakar mitachtav. For example, taking the pillow from under his head. Ulezeh hosiv da'afilu im l'datam mitzvah l'karev mitato. Even if you think that you're doing a big mitzvah by helping him to die because it's for his own benefit, he's suffering so much. Kagon shehu goses, like he's a goses, he's really suffering. Zman aroch, he's a goses zman aroch, he's for a long time in a goses. He should be goses just like a minute, but if it takes long, then it starts to be painful for him. It's visible that the guy is suffering. Yisurim gedolim. Mekom makom asur la'asot shum ma'aseh. You cannot do any action. Deken hu ratzon Hashem yitbarach, because it's God's will that he should live or die, however long. V'lo miboy lishmot hakar mitachtav shebezeh rosho meziz harbe. And not only is it forbidden to move a pillow from under his head, where his head will move a lot, if you do that, from high to low, but even to push him, move him a little is asur. even to like turn him or push him in some way. Va'afilu lo ya'aseh ma'aseh begufo klal. Even if you don't do anything to his body at all, it could be prohibited. El lahaniach tachat rosho bli hazazah klal et maftechot beit knesset. They had this idea that if you put the Beit Knesset keys on the pillow or under his pillow, it was like the door opening to let the soul out with the keys, so it would like let him die. He says even that is prohibited, because even though you're not touching him, but you're doing a maaseh that's mikarev et hamita, and you should let Hashem take care of it. Gam ken asur de sof sof oseh maaseh sheyamut mehera. He's doing an act that's causing him to die quicker, and that's what's forbidden. Af im ein hamaaseh begufo, even if that action is not touching his body. So wait a second, what about the Rebbe who did, the servant of Rebbe who threw the pot down? She did an action that was mikarev his mita, because she stopped the people from praying. So how come that? Amnam im yesh davar min hatzad sheme'akev yetziat nefesh. But if there's some secondary thing which is preventing him from dying, mutter lasiro, you can remove the obstacle from him dying. In other words, remove the people making prayers, or remove the wood chopper. Mutter lasiro dimemanav. So in other words, wait a second. It's mutter to remove it because you have two conditions. One is you're not touching his body, and two, you're not doing an action to cause him. You're not doing an action which causes people to die sooner. You're removing an action. You're removing something which shouldn't have been there in the first place. Some kind of thing that's ma'akev his soul from leaving. Something that prevents his soul from leaving. You're removing. He's going to explain more better than I did, I think. Mutter lasiro d'memanav shach im ha'ikuv mitzad zeh lama yisbol. If the soul is being prevented from dying because of this external factor, lama yisbol, why should we let him suffer? V'halo zehu eino machmat etzim gufo. This is his living not because of his etzim gufo, but not because of his very body. V'im ein ha'ikuv mitzad zeh. But if that thing that's chopping wood is not, the external thing is not causing him, hindering him from dying, halo lo ya'il klum. So it won't do any effect by removing it. So either it won't do any effect, or if it doesn't affect, well, that thing was external. That thing was artificially keeping him alive. Actually, we saw in the Darkei Moshe explained it even better. He said, really, it's forbidden, since he's a Goses, it's forbidden to chop wood nearby. It's forbidden to try to keep him alive. It's forbidden to pray for him to live if he's a Goses. If he's suffering, you must let him die. And so therefore, by removing it, you're just removing an illegal act. It's not just that it's some external thing it's illegal. And therefore, you're not doing anything wrong by removing it, because it should never be there in the first place. That's what the Ramah said. But let's finish the Aruch HaShulchan. V'gam hasarat hamelech milashano lo nechshav k'ma'aseh klal. He says, what about removing the salt from his tongue is also not considered an action. Here he gives an interesting point. Dinanua kal hu. It's a small movement. In other words, if it's a very small movement, we're not going to call that forbidden. It's only like really moving his hand or moving some part of his body. But just like taking something, his mouth is open, let's say, and you take some salt off of his tongue. That's not really called moving him. V'od mistama hanichu v'herich chayav. They put this salt there in order to make him live longer, probably. Umemela demuter lasiro, and therefore you could remove it because it shouldn't be there in the first place. They shouldn't be trying to keep his life along longer. So he's actually saying you could remove something that's there, as long as you don't cause a major movement of the body. And if it's a negligible movement of the body, you could remove something that's there. if it's artificially keeping him alive, and it should never have been put there in the first place since he's a Goses. That's actually would seem to imply that if there's oxygen tanks keeping him alive, and he's in a Goses state, you could remove them because he shouldn't have them. Sounds like that's what he's saying. But if we look in the Igros Moshe, if we look in this Igros Moshe where we were before, 73 Ayin Gimel, but now Sif Aleph, at the end of the first paragraph, he says, the second paragraph, he says, V'chole mesukan she'en yochol linshom tzarich liten lo chamsan. If a person can't breathe and he's mesukan, he's about to die and he's can't breathe, you can give him oxygen. Af shehu ba'ofen she'ef efshar lerapoto, even though you can't actually heal him with this method. Sharehu lahakel miyisura, but by giving him the oxygen, you're removing some of his suffering. Deah. So Rav Moshe is actually saying he's looking at the oxygen in a different way. He's saying the oxygen is causing the removal of the suffering. It's not necessarily there to prolong his life, and therefore it's not there be'isser. In other words, it wasn't put there just to prolong his life. It was put there to remove his suffering. And once his suffering is gone, there's no reason not to prolong his life. You know, it was the whole reason that we said we could shorten his life is because being a Goses, you're suffering. But if we get the oxygen, you're not suffering. And, you know, Rebbe was suffering. But here he's not suffering, he says. V'af shehu ba'ofen she'ef shadarapoto shaharehu lahakel miyisurav. That's why we give him the oxygen, just to make his life more pleasant. Dechisaron mima she'ef sharlin shom hem yisurim gedolim. That the suffering of not being able to breathe is a very big suffering. V'amsan salkan, and the oxygen removes it. Aval kevan shelo yihye nikar im yamut. But now we have a different problem, which is that we're never going to know if he died because he's going to keep getting oxygen. It's like he's on a breathing machine maybe, and he's going to keep breathing. We don't know if he's still alive or not. So therefore, he gives this idea of giving him a 2-hour supply of oxygen in a tank, and when it finishes, let it finish naturally. And there, in other words, we have no obligation to keep giving him. We have no obligation to keep promoting his life if he's a Goses. We're allowed to let him die naturally. We might want to remove him, but we should try to remove his yisurim, so we give him the oxygen. But if we can let it stop, and then see if he died already, and then we don't have to give him a new one. And if he's still alive, then we can give him another one. And we keep giving him more and more tanks of oxygen, but each time we check in between if it stopped. And I think by this, we by doing this, well, the point is like this: the oxygen is permitted to be there, so therefore we can't remove it. If we would find out that he died, we wouldn't be able to remove the oxygen because, well, I'm sorry. If he died, then obviously you could do anything. He's a Goses, and we can give him this oxygen, but he's a Goses. But we can give him this oxygen to remove his yisurim, and it's not a problem of lengthening his life because we're doing it to promote his better feeling. So it's really different from the case of the way that we saw in the Aruch HaShulchan, who was talking about that you're allowed to remove something that's artificially keeping him alive. He's not saying you're allowed to, he's being more from maybe, you're not allowed to remove this oxygen early and see if he dies. In other words, why not just take away some of the oxygen, take away after 10 minutes and see if he dies? So according to Rav Moshe, that would be a problem. You're not allowed to do that because you're removing something that you gave him. So he understands it as you're not allowed to take away anything that's there that's keeping him alive. So what about the case of the chopping of the wood? So we have to go like what we saw in the dark, what it says in Darkei Moshe, in the Ramah. What he writes is that because it was there by Isser, That's why we can remove it. And this oxygen is not there by Isser. Now, if we go back a little bit in Aleph, he says also another principle. He says, at the end of the first paragraph, these people that are suffering and these people that are impossible to heal, to bring them back to full health. But he'll actually be suffering Yisurim. But we could lengthen his life in his suffering state. Now, we can't remove his Yisurim, but we can lengthen his life. So he says, Ein liten lo mine refuot ele yenichum kamoshem. You should not give refuah in that case. You should not give him any medicines or anything. You should let him die. Because he's suffering, and he's going to die soon anyway. In other words, it's forbidden to give him, to prolong his agony, essentially. This is, of course, that you can't remove his surim. Ki liten lahem samei refuah sheyamut al yedei zeh v'ken la'asot eze pu'ula sheyigrom lekatser afilu l'rega achat hu b'chashivut shofek damim. You can't give him some drug that will shorten his life or do anything that will shorten his life. So you should let him just die in his own natural way. You should sit and not act. But if there's some drug that will make him feel better, so he says, if he's a Goses, you shouldn't give him any drugs. You shouldn't give him anything. But if he's just nearing death, but he's not Goses, then if you can remove his suffering, you can. As long as the thing you do to remove his suffering doesn't cause him to die sooner. So there may be some different opinions about morphine, but according to a study I saw from 2000, morphine doesn't shorten your life. So therefore, and it just removes the pain, so therefore it would be permitted to give it to a person. But the Rav Moshe says, but not if he's a Goses. If he's a Goses, you got to let him go. Because we don't want to get involved. At that point, it's like finished. So we don't get involved. That's what Rav Moshe says. So Rav Moshe seems to say that when there's suffering, that's when... So there's a general problem of, on the one hand, we want to save lives. We want to intervene to prolong life. On the other hand, we want to let people die. Sometimes they have to die. So one of the methods of determining which to do, when do we refrain from healing and when do we heal, has to do with suffering. So if the person is suffering, then, and we cannot remove that suffering, then we do not try to prolong his life. We refrain from healing, from prolonging his life, unless we could actually cure him. If we can only prolong the life, we don't if there's pain involved. But if we can remove the pain, then we should, as provided it doesn't shorten his life. So, and of course, if there's hope that we can heal him, of course we should try. There's another place that we're not going to look at right now, but in Igros Moshe in Yoreh 2, 174, section 3, Rav Moshe also discusses the Ramah, and he explains that when pain and suffering is involved, we are actually forbidden from prolonging life. We see pain as the critical dividing line for Rav Moshe. If there's pain, we cannot promote. We cannot try to keep him alive. We can't try to shorten his life. We can only try to relieve the pain without shortening his life. Okay, so I hope that gives you some ideas about Goses. We obviously cannot cover the whole topic. It's a major topic in Psak Halacha, how and when to intervene and what things can be done and can't be done. That's for your further study. Good night.